So I'm going to give you a quick tour of how our honey extraction process goes. So just follow along and I'll show you how this whole process works. It's pretty cool. So these are what we call honey supers. They have frames of honey in them. And in each of these cells is the honey that the bees are storing. So when the honey is fully dehydrated, which means going to last all winter long and is shelf stable, they will put a layer of wax over the top of those cells to ensure that it is sealed and stored for winter. So that looks a little bit like this. So you can see this white covering, that's actually just wax, just like what the cells are made out of, but it's on top. And so they got partway through capping this frame, but haven't done the whole frame. And then what we do is we test the honey inside each of these frames if it's not fully capped to make sure that it's shelf stable. We do that with this little device here. It's called a refractometer, and it tells us what the water content of the honey is, which allows us to determine whether or not it's shelf stable. So we only extract and sell the honey that is shelf stable. So how do we get the honey out? That's the next question. So if it has the wax cappings and it's shelf stable quality, as in it has the right moisture content, we actually cut the wax cappings off with a decapping knife, which is what this bucket is for. So you can see there's honey and there's wax cappings in here, and this is like a serrated knife that we use to cut those cappings off, and anything that we can't get, we have a little fork type tool that we can use to get the rest of the cappings off. Once the capping's off, the honey will run out of the comb. Now, to get the honey to just run out, you could have it sitting there and it would eventually drain out if you tipped it at an angle, depending on how viscous it is, but that's a really long process. So what we do is we use what is called a honey extractor, which is basically just a centrifuge, and we spin the honey out of the frames. So this is our honey extractor, and you can see in here, I actually just got done, but you can see in here, we put the frames in here and they spin. It has a motor on top, so this happens really fast, but the honey will fly out of the cells and it will land against the sides of the extractor and eventually pool down in the bottom of this honey extractor, which if you look from the outside, has what's called a honey gate, and the honey will run out. And then we strain it. So we have a double strainer here. It's got two layers. The bottom layer is finer than the top layer, and that gets all of the extra wax that may have come out as well, or any other impurities that came with it. And that all goes into a bucket. Once we have it in the bucket, we usually use this type of bucket, which also has a honey gate, to bottle up our jars. We just use mason jars to put our honey in. We use quart-sized jars and pint-sized jars, which this weighs 1 1/4 pounds and the quart weighs 2 1/2 pounds. And that's how we sell our honey. So I just thought I'd share a little bit of the process. I've got a little bit of video that is coming up right after this so you can watch how it actually works. Now you may be wondering what we do with all of this honey that isn't good and shelf stable. So there's a couple things that you can do with it. One of it is you can feed it back to the bees. So what we do after we extract all the honey, we end up with frames like this, which are mostly empty, right? So we've taken the cappings off and we've spun all the honey out. They're mostly empty, but they are still wet. What we do is we actually take that back out to the hives or just outside and allow to what we call rob. So that is to steal the honey out of it, and then they can take it back to their hives and use it for winter and restore it. You also will end up with yellow jackets and bald-faced hornets and carpenter bees and pretty much any type of insect that might like honey, which includes flies and ants. So it can be a little bit messy to do it that way, but it is nice to give back that honey that we're not going to be able to use. Now, this is called giving it back. After we get done extracting all the honey out of all these boxes and frames, we set it out and the local bees come and find it and clean it all up for us. We'll do a final wash down after it's done, but they'll have it almost dry of honey when they get done. And all those boxes have frames with lots of honey in them. They've been out for a couple days. But this one I just set out. You can see there's some other insects. That's not a honeybee. That's like a hornet or a wasp. But the rest of those flying bugs in there are honeybees. A few flies. Oh, there's a yellow jacket. But they worked hard to collect it, so we can let them take it back to their hive and store it again. Now, sometimes we have, towards the end of the season, if we don't have time to let them work on that honey long enough, we'll have a large quantity. So what we'll do is we'll actually extract it, and then it can be used for different things like mead. So we have a couple friends who actually brew and make mead. So what we usually do is we'll end up extracting it anyways, storing it separately with the higher moisture content in a different bucket, and then working out a deal with some of our friends who do brewing and make wine and things like that. So there's a couple different things you can do with it. It is still good. It just will ferment more easily, and it doesn't have the shelf stability that honey is known for. So you just have to be careful with it if it has too much moisture, so that way you don't end up with honey that could ferment and end up making someone sick, or end up with a wine that you weren't expecting. So that's what we do with our honey. If you're interested in grabbing any, let us know. We'll be having plenty to sell here coming up. And if you have any questions about this process, feel free to ask. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. Have a great day.